Alright, so I'm going to go a little bit in depth onto the M1911 or the 2011 that I made instructions for. I'm going in depth on the mechanism, the rubber band setup, and I'm also going to mainly talk about some of the issues people are having when they are building the model for themselves. The issues that I'm going to go over are the barrel disconnecting itself after cycling the mechanism a few times, or maybe even after just a couple times. I'm going to go over the mechanism also not resetting properly after taking the first shot. So you shoot it. This one actually I have set up to simulate the problem. But when you shoot it, the mechanism won't reset by itself. You have to pull the slide back and then it recycles, and then you pull this trigger, mechanism cycles, but the trigger does not reset. I'm also going to go over the beaver tail. Some of the issues people are having with the beaver tail is whenever they are cycling the mechanism for the model, the beaver tail is coming loose. I'm going to go over what I think the causalities of those are and some ways to fix them. So the first one, pretty easy, is the slide. I have these two set up. The red one is working properly, and like I said, the blue one is the problem one, the one that I have. I set up the rubber bands in this one to where it would simulate what people are going through with the issues. First one is with the barrel coming off after cycling it. This one, if you notice, when I tilt it back and use gravity to have gravity fight the power of the slide, it's able to fully cycle back to the very top, even with gravity fighting with the weight of the slide. With the red one, however, if I tilt it back, you notice that gravity is enough to pull the slide back a little bit, and it's not able to fully reset. Me personally, I prefer it this way with a weaker slide rubber band. That also makes it so that the trigger pull is a little bit easier as well too. But what that also does is it creates more longevity of the cycling of the model. So if I were to pull the trigger on this one, I would get more trigger pulls out of this one before eventually it's one of the quirks of the model, before eventually the barrel does run itself loose, before the clutch power finally gives out on the barrel and the frame due to the constant slamming of the slide into the back of the barrel. That's just something that happens. If there's a way you can think of to connect the barrel to the frame that isn't through clutch power, I would implore you to do that. I have put lots of thought into it, and that would have been something that I would have liked to have in this model. But for now, in this iteration, it is only being held on by clutch power. So after this one gets about 30 shots before you have to push down on the barrel to reseat it onto the frame with this weaker rubber band, the one that can't fight gravity. But honestly, I don't really know whenever I'm cycling this straight up into the air. I'm usually holding it horizontally, not vertically. But with this one, I get around 20 before I notice there's a little bit of separation between the frame and the barrel. So, and if that's something that's constantly happening to you, I would advise either, changing out the rubber bands. Like I said too, the rubber bands between these two slides are actually the same one. This one's just a little older, so it's a little weaker. This one's newer, so it has a little bit more of its elasticity in it. You could just stretch it out, leave it on, I don't know, like some studs, stretched out to its max capacity overnight or something, or for a few hours, I don't know. That may make it wear out a little bit. If the issue is happening constantly, like you push down on the barrel and then you take a few shots and then it happens again and your rubber band is weak, what could be happening is, what I'm going to do, so I'll take this off. Goodness. Ooh. Is these rubber bands for the beaver tail and the trigger, when you're squishing the barrel back down, what could be happening is those rubber bands could be getting pinched in between the plates, or I guess the 1x1 studs, and that could be causing there to be less clutch power between the barrel and the frame. So make sure that's not happening when you're repinching the barrel back down. What I'm going to go over now is probably the biggest thing that people will run into, and that is the rubber bands in the slide and the mechanism not cycling properly. So like you saw on this one is, they're both built actually, I wouldn't say 100% to the instructions. There's some small differences in the slides and whatnot, but for the most part, the main construction of these are built to what the instructions are. This one is working. This one is not. And the only difference is the way the rubber bands are set up. So you gotta pull the slide back, pull the trigger, gotta pull the slide back, and it cycles. Two possible things could be causing that. One is the trigger rubber band isn't strong enough, so that it's not strong enough to overpower the rubber band in the slide. But what I would do first is I would change the rubber band in the slide to try and get that as weak as possible with all the functionality still. And if you find that it's still really weak and the trigger is not working and it's still not cycling, we can go into that fix, and then we'll go into the slide last. But firstly, we'll go into the working model because these are actually set up the same for the trigger. What you can do is we'll take this off and take the slide off, and we'll go into that in a little bit. And I have another way to set up that. I'll go into that in a little bit. Anyways, since we have this apart, we're going to go into the beaver tail and what is happening with the beaver tail. So if the beaver tail is coming loose, more than likely it's because this rubber band running along the top is too strong. This piece, and we're going to go into the trigger mechanism. And I got a little helper here. This piece will push this axle through, and I can reach my finger in here and snap this portion off nice and easy. Okay, so this is exactly how the mechanism is set up in the tutorial. There's a few different ways you could set this up as well if you're finding that the trigger is too weak and you've done all you can. I'd say keep this the same as much as you possibly can, and more or less tune the slide before you tune this. But if you found that you've tuned the slide and you've gotten it as weak as possible, and you've tried the fix that's at the end of this video, towards the end after this, do this or try this. Maybe move this move this red stud down one, and that should stretch out the elastic a little bit more so that it has a little bit more strain to it. And if that doesn't work, you can take it and you can get rid of the stud entirely, and you can just wrap it around the gray axle here. If you're using a really long rubber band, you don't have these short ones, what you can do is actually you can move this orange dot up one, and that'll shift the exerted force on this lever further away from the fulcrum. So the way levers work is the further away you are from the fulcrum, the more force is exerted if you're putting force. So if you put the same amount of force at the tip of a lever versus towards the center of the lever, the force will feel greater, will be multiplied by the distance between the fulcrum and where the force is exerted. So the closer you are, the less force; the further away, more force. And we're going to go into that a little bit more too for the different fix on the slide if you're having trouble with the slide mechanism. So this one, it does work. The trigger is working good in this configuration, but you can change it to where the rubber band is further down or even further down, and you could even shift this up. But I found that if you shift this orange one up any higher, what that does is it puts too much strain on the elastics that I have in general, and they are more prone to breaking. Also, last thing, make sure you are twisting the elastic. That also makes it so it's coiled up, so the elastic almost seems like it's shorter for the length that it's at. When you're twisting it, it's tightening it even more. So the more twist you put, the tighter it's going to be. So that is a more fine-tuned way of tuning the trigger. Is I could add a few more twists, and that'll make it a little bit stronger or have a little bit more force. Okay, so this is the beaver tail assembly, I guess, with the grip taken off. One of the important parts, there's a few important parts for the beaver tail for it to be secure. First part is this piece, this 1x1 modified plate clamp piece. What this piece does is it creates a secondary, another pivot point other than the one in the rear to shift the exerted force on the bottom of the beaver tail towards the top and it reverses it. So if you're pushing this way, this pivot point reverses that force, so it is now exerted towards the back. So if I don't have the grip on and I push on the bottom, it'll flip off like this. What that does is that ensures that there is force being exerted in this opposite direction, so this doesn't separate. This is also only held on by 2 studs, 1 stud on each side, so there needs to be something in order to keep this from over-rotating, so it doesn't just kick itself off the back, and that's what this part in the grip is for. This interfaces with the bottom of the beaver tail here, so that it doesn't over-rotate, so it doesn't end up doing that, where it kicks itself off. So if you're running into the problem where the beaver tail is like disconnecting at this point, and that is an issue that I had initially before I introduced this piece, is when you gripped it, it would force itself inward, and this rubber band and whatever, and your grip also would force the beaver tail in, and it would disconnect itself. But since I introduced this piece, I haven't had that issue. It's come up every now and then if, I don't know, like I jam the back of it or I grip the model in a very particular kind of way. I'm not really exactly sure what kind of way, but you can put a lot of force on this portion. Oh, I don't know, I can, the beaver tail, I'm sure maybe if you push right here, because the fulcrum is right here. So you'd have to put force over here in order to reverse the action of putting force here, of pushing it out the back. So if you're running the issue where the beaver tail is disconnecting, this rubber band doesn't need to be very strong. Try and make it as weak as possible. Same thing like for the whole build. Try and get the elastics as weak as possible so that you're not putting unnecessary strain onto the model. All right. And then a little extra bonus thing. If you find that your beaver tail is not resetting properly like this, just give this top portion where it's at a squeeze, and it should start resetting by itself. If that doesn't work, what could be another issue is if this is too pinched where the safety is at, you'll see it's not going to work now. If I push on this axle, and you can see the safety pushes out a little bit, that fixes it. And also, just getting this top portion a little pinch. It's something with like the brakes, maybe if they get realigned, it's causing unnecessary friction on it. So there you go. All right, we'll get into the slide. All right, so on this model, this is the one that isn't working properly. I'll show you again, it's not working. So disassemble, take off the front portion, slide it out the back. This one is really stiff. Okay. Let's see. So you can hear, and you can see how fast it is as well too. And you can hear it smacking against it. It's got a fair amount of force versus this one. This one is built according to the instructions. A lot softer, it's not as loud. It's a little bit slower. You can see if I put the forces against each other this way, see the blue one is very easily able to push this red one. But this is the alternate setup as well. This one actually is even weaker, but still has all the reset ability that this one does. And if I put the forces of these ones against each other, you can see the red one budges a little bit, but the black one gets the full range of motion. So this would be more ideal. So I'm going to show you how to set up like this. This one is set up according to the tutorial, so you know how to do this one. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to use the same elastic that's actually in this one, the one that's super stiff, and I'll show you how to tune it. Okay, so first thing, we're going to take off the iron sight, and then we're going to take off this 1x2 Technic brake with the plates on top. Yours could be set up a little bit different. I'm not sure if this one is built, if this slide is built 100% to it, but I know the mechanism portion is. Okay, so here we can see rubber band wraps around the bottom of it. It is pretty much actually built how the instructions are built, but the elastic is way too strong. Runs through this 1x1 Technic brick, wraps around this 1x1 stud, and this one we can see a little different. Take off the iron sight. This one is built with a 2x2 plate on the top, and take off the 1x2 Technic brick. I usually disconnect it at this portion here, and it should just come off. There we go. Okay, so the difference is here, these actually use the same style of rubber band. I think this one might be using a large type, and this one is using a medium rubber band. But you see this one, the rubber band goes over the top, closest to you, and this 1x1 Technic brick is flipped. For this one, the 1x1 Technic brick is flipped to the other way, and the rubber band goes underneath. The reason the Technic brick is flipped is because the lip on where the hole is in the 1x1, the lip is shorter on the top versus the bottom of the brick. And so if the rubber band is routed toward this top, it would be better to have the shorter lip versus the longer lip, so it has more room for it to move through the channel. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to show you how to set up this way. And for good measure, I'm going to show you that the red one is also set up according to how the tutorial is, and it's also working as well. So you can do it either way. You can tune it one way or the other, but if you've messed with this this method a bunch, you can try out this new method and see if this works for you. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Rubber band is underneath. It is using the 2 small type elastics, and yeah, this one works pretty good. Yeah. All right. So we'll jump into this. We're going to set this one up like this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out the entire mechanism portion. We can set this aside for the time being. First thing, we're going to separate this 1x2 plate, get our rubber band unattached there, and then we can actually leave this attached. What we want to do though is we want to reroute the little knot that's created to the close side, to this side. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to move the elastic closer to the fulcrum. And remember, this is the fulcrum. This is the center of our lever. So the closer it is to the fulcrum, the less we'll feel the exerted force of it. So it's not going to have as much force. So move this closer to the fulcrum, and it's going to wrap over the top. So we want the knot to be situated towards this side. If the knot is situated to this side versus that side, you're going to get some elasticity differences. And it's all these little movements very much count in such a small spot or in such a small space. Okay. All right. Now what we do after this, take the 1x1, feed it back through. I don't even know if any of disassembling it was super necessary. Actually, you could just shift that closer to the fulcrum without disassembling this whole thing. Put it on here, and I'll take your 1x2 plate, reattach it, secure it, and then you can attach it back to the slide. And then don't attach the 1x1 to the slide. Leave it free floating. What it's going to do is it'll just attach to the opposite side. And then make sure you have the rubber band going over the top of the Technic piece versus the bottom. And I'm sure you can already feel that this is a lot less stiff than it was before. This one is even less stiff because it's using a larger rubber band than this one. But it'll work with a medium and it'll work with a large one. So I don't know if it'll work with 2 small ones. It might work with 2 small ones, just like in the red one. But anyways, we're going to reassemble. Slide this piece under here, pinch that together, then pinch the rear together. There we go. Do a dry run right now. Feels a lot better. Put our 1x2 Technic brick with the plates on it. Put our iron sights back on, and that's all secured. I'll just put this black one aside. And what we'll do now is we're ready to go. So we'll take our red rubber band, loop it around the back of the slide on this clip piece. Make sure your rubber band goes around the Technic piece on either side. And make sure there's no twists in it as well too. If it's twisted, then it won't work properly. So feed this over the barrel. And what you want to do as well to make sure you are feeding it through the channel that is between the barrel and the rails on the frame. And then this is the part where the rubber band might get switched to both sides. Make sure it's one on each side. There. And then I like to push the beaver tail in so it's a little bit easier. And then have the throwback mechanism go to the left slide of the hammer. And sometimes this takes a little finagling. I don't know what it gets hung up on in here, but it gets hung up on something sometimes. There we go. Perfect. And then just put our front on. And then I like to pull the slide back, and then I put my finger through the lightning cuts and then my pinky on the front of the exposed barrel, and just make sure to push this piece on there securely, and then even just some of these other pieces as well too. Okay. So what I like about this slide construction as well too is it's actually not a very tight fit. It is the same vertical dimensions, but horizontally on each side of the barrel between the frame is actually 1/4 plate thickness. It's not exactly the snug fit on the left and the right sides. And that allows you, it's very frictionless, it's not a lot of tension between the barrel and the slide, so that allows you to use pretty weak rubber bands. You don't have to use a very strong rubber band, and that's why the red one, it free floats so easily. It moves even if you like, I don't know, give it some inertia or whatever. Anyways, works. You'll notice sometimes if you cycle the mechanism to see that it lifts up the back of the slide. The mechanism is going in the path of least resistance. So instead of cycling the lever inside the slide, it would rather just pick up the back of the slide because that's the path of least resistance. But I will show you that even if I hold down the slide, it'll still reset properly. Hold down the slide, it doesn't lift it up. There you go. It's kind of being weird because I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on it, but there you go. And you'll see I can even cycle it slowly. It's doing the slide pickup thing, but yeah, the beaver tail's working. Yeah, so I'll show you. I can put a lot of force on this. I know you can't really see how much force I'm putting, but I don't know. I can fake that, but yeah, you can put a lot of force on that. I don't know. It has to be something with the rubber band being too tight between the top of the beaver tail and there. Make that weaker, and you shouldn't have any issues. So yeah, remember, weaker rubber band on the slide. It doesn't need to be super strong. If it is too strong, if you're getting like 20 or so shots, that's about normal before you're having to press down on the top of the barrel. So for this one, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Do I notice anything? We'll see if it changes a little bit. It's 20 shots. And then for the red one, I don't actually have it put back together right now. I'm getting like 30, easily 30, and like I just did with this one, easily 20, but if anything between 20 and 25, it might have came undone. So we're actually going to go to failure. We're going to see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh. 12, 13, 14, 15, 15. Oh, it's up here. So what's happening is that's getting hung up on that. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. So 36, and it came apart. Okay, I'll put the red one back together. We'll see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. 42. And it did exactly, broke exactly where. So, out of a weaker rubber band, just getting a weaker, different rubber band, like 42 consistent rapid fire cyclings of the mechanism, and it broke itself. And then 36 on this one with the stronger. So get like safely 20, and then just push down on the top of the barrel. If it's being that much of an issue with you, I don't know what to say. Like you can try and figure something out. I mean, like I said, I tried. So here you go.